Well, good afternoon if you are in New York City. Good evening if you are in London or Newcastle in the United Kingdom. Greetings to people in Armenia. Greetings to people all over the world who follow Fred Plotkin on Fridays here on Adagio, the place where classical music happens. Adagio is a video and audio streaming platform dedicated to supporting artists and to making classical music and opera available to fans all over the world. I'm very happy to welcome my guest today. She's someone I've known for quite a while, someone I've worked with, um, someone whose work, I can say this is true, is universally admired, which I can't say about everyone, but I can say that about Merrin Lazyan. Did I pronounce your name correctly?
You did. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. Lazyan. And Merrin is the co-creator and executive producer of a program that opera lovers all over the world know. It's called Aria Code. And Aria Code, I imagine, is a pun on the term area code. The original name, if I remember, was WQX Aria. Is that correct?
I actually don't remember that, but I hope I forget a lot of things these
It
days, but
preceded you then in some way because both Merrin and I have worked at WQXR. Both Merrin and I have worked at the Metropolitan Opera. We have places in common where we have worked. WQXR, for people who don't know, is New York's classical music radio station. It's America's oldest and largest classical music radio station, having been founded in 1935. It is part of New York Public Radio, whose station call letters is WNYC, New York City, which was founded in 1924, making this year the centennial of the creation of one of the most important radio stations in America. The history of how those two stations got together, we don't have to cover here. But WNYC is a cultural institution. I always like to describe it that way. That's also a news organization. A lot of people don't see the two together, but I do. WQXR is primarily a cultural institution that used to have a strong news component because it used to be owned by the New York Times. And it was known as the radio stations, plural, of the New York Times. And that's because there were two WQXRs, AM and FM. And FM was music, AM was talk relating to music. And Merritt is much too young to remember this, but I do. I was raised basically on WQXR AM, listening to people talk all day about Beethoven, about Leonard Bernstein, about Mahler, about a lot of, let's call them the dead white men, plus the fantastic women who perform them. So you would have Wanda Landowska, the harpsichordist, come in and talk about the harpsichord and Bach. And this, imagine a talk show all day that was talking about classical music and opera and jazz and Broadway musicals and so on. It had a whole series of hosts. One of them was Carl Haas, another was Robert Sherman. There are many, many. And it was a remarkable part of the cultural landscape of New York City. When WQXR was then sold by the New York Times, and this is the long story I'll make short, and acquired by New York Public Radio, the AM side was given up in the deal. The FM side was acquired and is primarily a music station that also has programming, cultural programming, educational programming, much of it created in the podcast sphere. In other words, ways to listen to it beyond listening to the music on WQXR. The best program, by everyone's consensus, is Aria Code, which Merrin co-created. And yes, it was originally called WQX Aria. And I think Aria Code is a better name. But
yes.
tell us how, to our listeners around the world, how this idea came to evolve. And then I will talk about my feeling about the show, and you can talk about your concept of the show because it's very special. So go ahead. How did it start?
Thank you. Well, so when I was at WQXR, and I now work at the Metropolitan Opera, and the Met is, in partnership and always has been with WQXR on this show. But back when I was working at WQXR, I think the original idea probably came in late 2017, and I was working on a number of things. I was a fairly new producer there at the time, but I myself have a background in opera. I studied classical singing and opera at the Royal College of Music longer ago than that. And so even though much of what I was producing were sort of more of the general programs for QXR, I also started working on some things sort of in my free time that were more specifically focused on opera. So that included moonlighting, creating this whole sort of early first podcast effort of mine, which needn't be named here because I was very, very green, but it taught me a lot to work on that. And I was doing a lot of live Facebook interviews with Met artists. And so through that, I sort of developed a relationship both with those artists and also with the Met and, with their press team and PR team. And established some rapport and trust. So there came a moment, I do think it was in 2017, where an opportunity to do more creative work specifically focused on opera came up. And so I came up with this embarrassingly long list of ideas for things we might do, QXR might do. And one of those ideas was to unpack a single aria. And in this case, I really was thinking about a single aria. I was thinking about the Queen of the Nights aria, famous aria from the Magic Flute, and having a singer. At the time, I had Catherine Lewick in mind, even though she doesn't know this story, but talk about the aria, performing the aria, some of the technical demands from a largely musical standpoint, but also the standpoint of her experience of performing it. So go deep into a single aria. And the people that I was working closely with at the time looked at this list and they said, I think that's the idea that has the most promise. So from that seed, we just sort of started talking more about what that could be and how do we turn that into not just a single show, but actually a series and eventually a podcast. And there were two music podcasts that I really enjoyed at the time. One was Song Exploder, which a lot of people listen to and love. And the other, I don't know if it's as popular here. It's a BBC show called it's a BBC show called Soul Music. Mm-hmm. And, Song Exploder has a sort of technical element to it. It goes deep into the making of a song, sort of the history of it. Whereas soul music is really, it's all in the word soul. It's really about the storytelling and about human connections to that music. So you might have people who just fell in love with this song, or they fell in love to some song. And so you hear these stories interwoven. And taking these two shows, I think it's that intersection that Aria Code sort of decided it wants to live at. I want to explore both the technical elements of the music, but in a way that's inclusive of people across the board, people who really are have some facility with music theory, the history of music, but also with people who just have some curiosity and are prepared to sort of open themselves to learning a bit about it. So pair that, the technical elements, performance elements as well, with the more storytelling based aspects of a piece. So, these were conversations that happened over the course of a few months, I think. And ultimately, we brought that idea and a few other ideas to the Met, to Peter Gelb, and he liked it. And from there, about a year-long development process began. There's a long runway to launching a whole new show. And that the Aria Code is also a pretty complex podcast as far as they go. Multiple voices, multiple interviews, a really sort of hefty editing job goes into all of them, and then really intricate musical scoring. So it was something that took some time to kind of come into its own and develop, but it sort of felt, by the time it was kind of off the ground and running, it sort of felt like it arrived fully formed. I don't exactly know how to describe it, but on the one hand, it took a while to put together, and on the other hand, it sort of knew exactly what it needed to be from the very beginning. So we launched in December of 2018 with an episode about the great Act One finale of La Traviata. Had the wonderful Deanna Damrau on that episode and a couple of other guests. And yeah, I earlier this year finished producing the fourth season of the show. So it's had a life so far. It survived the pandemic, and in many ways has been sort of a great love of my life for the last several years.
I know most people know, but I just want to say that Peter Gelb is the general manager of the Metropolitan Opera for people who don't know. Since you raised the pandemic, I'm going to talk about it. I've appeared, I believe, 3 times in Aria Code, and one time was really in the worst part of the pandemic when we were all locked in. There was no vaccine, there was social distancing, and you arranged to have someone deliver a case to my building that was locked. And you sent me vocally, I think, the combination to unlock the case. It had equipment that I placed on this desk where I am right now. We made a recording because the quality of the sound of Aria Code, apart from anything else, is extraordinary. It's really superb radio quality that one finds at New York Public Radio and at the Met. And therefore, we didn't see each other, and I didn't see anyone. I would go out to buy food and avoid everyone and come back and bring the food and have an encampment in this little apartment. And the first opportunity I had to do any kind of broadcasting was this particular episode of Aria Code. After we did that, I locked the case. I put the equipment in, I locked the case. I left it down at the lobby of my building. Someone came and took it away and apparently got back to you.
Yep.
And talk then about the special challenges of recording a broadcast, which is different from Zoom, what you and I are doing now. When you're doing that kind of, you and I are having a conversation, there are 2 of us, we're not playing music, although people who subscribe to Adagio can link and hear all the music we might talk about and all the music they want to hear. But this was a very different and more complicated endeavor, making a recording and having me, who is a speaker but not a tech person, operate my own technology for you.
Yeah. I mean, it was especially important for that show during that time because, there are the interviews that make up the narrative, but the music is such an important character on the show. It's as fundamental as everything else that's going on. And the Met has this wonderful, wealth of recordings of all of many of their productions going back a very long time. So we're using such beautiful, fully mastered recordings. Having sort of Zoom quality audio of the people speaking paired up with that music just wouldn't have worked. And I think it was just so important that it sounded great. So yeah, we had to spend some time early in that process trying to figure out how we were going to manage that. Normally with remote recordings, I would have just booked someone into a local studio wherever they happened to live and had a professional recording done, but couldn't do that at that time, at least not for a long time in the early pandemic. So our wonderful engineering team at New York Public Radio devised these kits, these hard, what are those cases called? I want to call them Pelican cases, but I think I'm making that up. Is that what they're called? I don't know.
I like the idea of a Pelican case. That sounds like a John Grisham novel.
It does. It does. I don't think it's right, but these big, tough black cases, and inside there was, a nice quality microphone, a pair of headphones, a tiny little tripod, and an iPad that had recording software that I had some remote control over via this program called Riverside. So on the one hand, our engineers made it sort of easy. I wouldn't say foolproof, but it was an astoundingly good solution to the problem, and truly pretty user friendly. We had a little guide, and I would talk people through sometimes beforehand on Zoom, but there were challenges with that, of course. So it
Hmm.
adds a whole level of sort of administration and logistical planning. We had, I think, 6 of these audio kits that were making their way across the country and back to us here in New York throughout that season. And that particular season was long. It
Yeah,
was 18 episodes, which doesn't necessarily sound like a lot, but that
it
spanned the
does.
majority
Yeah.
of the year. And so, there was just a lot of juggling these
Hmm.
expensive audio kits and trying to keep track of them. But also, as foolproof as they were, things go wrong, and people, the guests that I had on the show, world famous musicians or just, wonderful academics or just people with stories that were related to what was going on in the music. They're not engineers themselves. They don't, they're not working with audio equipment on a regular basis. So, I felt some low level anxiety much of the time about making sure we had a recording, what would happen
Hmm.
if it failed entirely or if it just didn't sound good for whatever reason, which sometimes did happen despite everyone's best efforts. It was logistically, it was difficult. And then there was just always this feeling that it was a little bit out of my control how this was going to go. And I'm so glad that for the most part it went pretty well. And I do think the show continued to sound great throughout that year. But by the time it was possible to book people back into studios, I was just breathing a huge sigh of
Yeah.
relief that I could turn that back over to the wonderful professionals who are really, really equipped to
Hmm.
engineer. And that is not my skill set. I can do the minimum with that, but I am so grateful and have so much admiration for the people who really do that. So I'm so happy that we're not still in the land of audio kits, but it really did work, and it was the way that we could continue making the program.
I bring it up because a lot of times people who flip on their device, whatever that is, don't have a clue about how hard this is to make happen technically. Um, People who do what I do are often required to know how to work the technology. And I'm able to do this Zoom with the help of Timo and other colleagues in Berlin on Adagio. But Zoom is not quite the challenge
Right.
that what you do is, because we have a direct conversation that's recorded and buonanotte, as they say in Italian. But what Aria code is a whole other expression of the music and the ideas in the music. And that's what I want to get into now. But I thought it was important that next time you listen or flip on your podcast, there's a lot of work there if you have something that's done very well, and a lot of unpredictability that then has to be addressed. Aria code is then edited, but it's edited, as Merrin said, um, with great precision. And that to me is part of the specialness of it. Um, Let you pick any aria that you think worked out well as an example of a show that you did, and then we'll just talk about that aria and the way you built the program.
Hmm. Let's take. Oh goodness. So as I said, my memory's bad. The Rake's Progress. What is the name
Mhm.
of that aria? That's the soprano aria. Um,
By Anne,
a word from Tom. Yeah,
the
and
word
True
from
Love.
Tom.
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
not the most standard rep selection.
No, no.
We can go more standard rep if that would help. But
No, you
but that's,
you pick what works for you.
yeah. Let's see. I haven't thought
Mhm.
this through yet, so we'll see how far we'll see how far down this path it continues to work.
So, who did you engage to have be the singer of that, and who did you engage to come talk about how they relate to the aria? And I say that advisedly, how they relate to the aria.
Yep. So the singer was the wonderful soprano Dawn Upshaw,
Hmm.
who, I don't know how much she's performing these days, and certainly not at the Met. But when I was developing as a singer, she was a little bit of an idol of mine. I loved her
Right.
voice, I loved her repertoire, and her performance of Lieder as well, her song performances. So I was really enthusiastic to actually get to meet her and talk to her. There was also the wonderful, I'll need to try to remember his name, the wonderful, I think, music librarian from San Francisco Opera.
Mhm.
First name is Michael. I can look that up maybe, but
Steinberg?
no,
Yep.
no,
Okay.
feel bad not remembering. So
That's
uh,
okay. I didn't mean to put you on the spot here, but we can
no,
speak. We can call
you
him
know,
Michael.
I made,
That works.
if that's his name, I made this choice. So, and then there were two other people, again, whose last names I might not remember. One of them I will. One was a curator at a museum in London who kind of oversees the paintings that the Rake's Progress is
Mhm.
actually based on, a series of paintings.
Is that the Wallace collection?
Nope.
Museum? No? Okay.
Fred, why did I choose this one? I
Oh,
don't know.
sorry. It's okay.
um, well, I think the reason actually is because the story and this final guest was really compelling to me. One of the four daughters of Johnny Cash,
Wow.
because in thinking about this aria and in thinking about the story of the Rake's Progress, you have the Rake, Tom Rakewell, who makes all of these terrible choices, and it's at the expense of Anne Truelove, the woman
Hmm.
who, the sweet, innocent woman who has completely given her heart to him, but he goes off to London, has a sort of debauched existence. He drinks, he parties, he, runs around on her, and she is, as her name, True Love, suggests, she's true and she's steady. And somehow, as I was just thinking about this story, Johnny Cash came to mind, and not so much his relationship with June, but actually,
His wife, June Carter Cash. Yeah.
yeah, his second wife,
Second wife.
but
Yeah.
more his relationship with his first wife, who had sort of been loyal to him, and then he had become famous and gone off, and she had been left at home with the children, and
Mhm.
they had that sort of fraught relationship where she was always sort of waiting for him to do the right thing by her. So I was just sort of interested in getting Johnny Cash's first wife's side of the story.
Mhm.
One of the things that I found, there were lots of times when I would find or choose a person, a civilian, just someone whose
Yep.
story I read about on the internet or heard about on a podcast, and it felt to me instinctively, and because of some of the details that I knew, that there was some alignment, or even a sort of surprising amount of alignment between what their life story was and the story of a particular opera or character or the aria itself. So many times there were so many more overlaps than I even could have imagined. So I just had tons of these sort of magical moments in interviewing all sorts of people where they'd be talking. I'd ask a question that I thought would yield certain kinds of connections, and maybe it would, but then it would yield even deeper and more shocking connections
Hmm.
to the character, the protagonist, the aria. And that, talking to one of Johnny Cash's daughters, it was that sort of experience. And also this curator from the museum in London talking about these paintings and having her bring the story of the paintings to life alongside this kind of real life story, as well as the story of Tom Rakewell and Anne Truelove. And there was just something about the way that all of it came together, that I was able to piece it together,
Hmm.
that I found really incredibly satisfying in the end. Um, there are lots of examples like that, from the show. Maybe better ones where I would have been able to remember everyone's name, for
Well, I
instance.
think you
But
gave
still,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think you gave a perfect example of what I love about the show. Many things, but specifically this, that when I teach opera to people, which I do constantly, even if they don't want me to, I walk up to them in the opera house and I'll start talking. Um, Inevitably, my message is that opera is not just for the cognoscenti, for the opera lovers, but that opera as an art form is the best art form. It's the most complete art form. It's the one that speaks to every human being individually, and that we can collectively sit in the opera house and watch the same cast and hear the same music with the same conductor, see the same production, and come away with very different experiences because it's what we as audience members bring to it that makes us feel one thing and not another thing. Um, and what I loved from the beginning with Aria Code is that you might have the likes of me on as a professional talking about the composer, the history, the singer, the content of the opera, but then you'll have someone or two other people on talking about their experiences in life that are expressed or mirrored by the aria and by the opera that it sits in, where they're not in any way connected to opera. But nonetheless, you, without underlining, reveal opera's connection and relevance to all of us. And I think the example you just gave about Anne Trulove and about the Cash family and so on is perfect. Although with my opera mind, it quickly went to the fact that Richard Wagner's first wife, Minna, sat at home and was the same thing. Like, when is he coming home and when will he stop gallivanting out there with the Westendonck and everyone else, and then Cosima and all that? It's the same story, which Wagner, being Wagner, depicted in Das Rheingold and in The Ring, of Fricka and Wotan, the impatient Wotan, the correct but annoying Fricka, annoying to Wotan at least. Um, and it's life mirrored to all of us all the time.
Yep. Yeah.
But what I'm wondering at, and this, I'm not putting you on the spot, but I'm saying with great admiration, how did you instantly or eventually or gradually get to the realization that leads to the structure of Aria Code that makes it different really from any other music appreciation thing that I hate that term, but it's used. Um, we don't appreciate it. We love it. We experience it. We live it all the time. And those of us who love opera find echoes of our life experiences and what the characters go through, what the composers and librettists tell us. How did you come to that realization?
I think that was baked into the idea of the show very early. I think that I and the people at WNYC that I was working with, developing this with, and the Met, I think there was an understanding that in order for it to, this is going to sound a little extreme, but in order for the show to matter, you know, outside of a really, really narrow band of serious opera lovers, which is pretty niche, in order for it to matter, it was going to have to address something more, or something, not that opera doesn't address something more, but it was going to have to open that up really. And I think it was it was really in the DNA of the show. So I can't pinpoint it, but I can say that from very early on, that was sort of the point. And you expressed it beautifully. I'm not sure I'd be able to articulate it as well as you just did in many ways, despite the fact that I've, you know, written about this show so many times and had to articulate why it matters, what the point is, what it's aiming to do. But there is, I mean, I think it's a testament to you. And
Well, you can
also,
quote me if you want. It's okay.
I will, maybe when I get to record this, I'll take some
Okay.
transcription and kind of use that as a show description from now on. But yeah, I think that was sort of the point all along. So I'm glad you think it worked.
Oh God, yes. And I wouldn't say that. I don't. Here's an American expression. I don't butter up. I just don't. I always state politely but firmly my opinions when they're positive, and very carefully not state my negative opinions unless they can make something better. But if if I don't have a positive opinion, I won't say it. So the fact that, number one, I asked you to join me today for a conversation, but number two, that I have a very positive opinion, it comes from not only loving opera, because I teach opera my whole life and I talk about opera and I promote opera, but not everything that I see out there promoting opera does it nearly as well as Aria Code. And in fact, I see a lot of junk out there, and it's very frustrating because it doesn't help the cause of opera, what a lot of people do when they quote are promoting or teaching or encouraging opera. It's torture, actually, and full of mistakes. So, um, in preparation for our conversation today, I didn't do much preparation because we know each other, but I did a little research and learned something about you that I did not know. We all go to college. You went to Harvard. You majored in psychology. Now
I
that opens a big door for me, like one of the doors in Bluebeard's Castle. This is door number five.
which door? Yeah, which door is very
Door
important.
number five. And so when you enrolled in Harvard, did you intend to study psychology or did that come to gradually? And with that, and you've written a book about two books on psychology. So therefore, there was that in you before I ever met you, and I never knew this about you.
Yeah.
And to what degree does your study of psychology influence and flavor your production of Aria Code?
I speaking of DNA, I think so many things are really baked into this show, and so yes, I studied psychology. I did intend to, but I also, I had multiple interests at the time, and I really, as is my way, I was sort of indecisive about what I wanted to pursue. I could imagine all sorts of different paths, and I effectively double majored in psychology and music, although at Harvard at the time you couldn't actually have two concentrations.
Mm-hmm.
So I chose what I thought was a more practical concentration, but
Yep.
spent a lot of time in taking music classes, and I was taking voice lessons and performing. And I spent a fair amount of time taking literature classes as well, which I think also bears out when you kind of look at Aria Code as a show. So psychology, music, and literature were sort of the three most compelling fields of study for me. And right after I graduated, I made the decision to go to grad school to study singing, not because I knew right then that I absolutely wanted to be a professional singer forever and ever, but because I thought if I don't do this now, I
Mm-hmm.
probably will never do it. This is probably the only time in my life when I will try this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did. And I was in London for 5 years, first studying for a couple of years and then performing as a soprano. But in that time, I was writing and doing a lot of editing as well, sort of to pay the bills.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those psychology books happened during that time. And, there was a way in which I was still sort of undecided about what a career looked like for me or what I really wanted it to look like. And in 2011, I think, I was basically at the end of my 20s and I'd sort of been singing for a while and I had a sense of what a career in singing might look like. And I was never going to be singing on stage at the Met. I was never going to be singing on stage at Covent Garden. And it's a very difficult career. It's a difficult career even if you are an international superstar,
Yep.
and singing on those stages difficult in different ways. But I think it's especially difficult if you're not anywhere near that level. And there are some artistically fulfilling projects, but it's
Mm-hmm.
very hard to have a stable living. And so at that point, I really wanted to find myself work that was creative because I needed to be doing creative work. And if it could be musically related, that would be great. And so I stumbled around for a little while. I worked in book publishing for just a year. I was at Juilliard
Well, I
for,
want to talk to you about the book publishing. We'll get to that later, but
yes. But I'm taking a long and not very scenic route around
yeah.
answering this question. But maybe if I'm trying to land this plane, what I'll say is that um, I took a long time to figure out how these various interests married each other. And will I always have an opportunity to find the intersection between all of these things? I don't know. But with
Mhm.
Aria Code, in part because I was making it, it was such a personal expression of my background, my interests, my passions, the things I was reading and listening to, and how I couldn't have been luckier than
Mhm.
to get to express all of those things. In some ways, it's the most consummate expression of myself, my own
Yeah.
personal history, as anything I've done, including when I was singing myself.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's very much in there. I think it's very much in there, and what a joy and a gift that I could make something that I can say that about.
Um, about book publishing, because it relates to this.
Okay.
The rhythm, the time frame of books is very different from the rhythm and time frame of broadcasting, podcasting, and so on. Broadcasters can go live, they can record, they can then do things that are edited, which is different from just recording conversation. Um, Book publishing is incredibly exhausting and laborious and slow. And I know you worked at Random House, and I think 5 of my books have been published by Random House. And it's a big institution, very storied and so forth. And it has different imprints and wings. It's acquired other former publishers. And when people ask me who my publisher is, I have to remember who has been acquired by whom, because perhaps when my
Yeah.
book was acquired, it was different than my current publisher is, even though I have the same editor. Um, but I love writing books. I've written 10. I hope to do more. But the focus, the time frame, the creativity involved in that is entirely different from doing something live or in a compressed time frame. When I've done radio, sometimes they'll say to me, okay, you have 8.5 minutes. And it's not 9 and it's not 8, it's 8.5 minutes. And it has to be done that way. And the focus is very different. With our conversation now, we're a little more free flow and open, and we can talk as long as we think that we have interesting things to say and that our audience will be with us. Typically, these shows are 60 to 90 minutes. Um, Therefore, when you arrived in publishing, you arrived from the UK where you had been singing and studying music. Did you visit Freud's tomb in London while you were there?
No, that was an oversight.
Okay, all right.
It sounds
It's
like you
still
have. Is it
he's still
still
there.
there? Is it worth the visit? What's it
Yeah,
like?
absolutely. Yeah. Um, but when you went from the world of live performance, from academia into publishing, and I'm not criticizing publishing at all, but it's just a very different creative endeavor. How did that feel, and how did you experience it, given what you had in your bones already?
It was it was really not the right fit for me, but I also was kind of in the wrong place. I spent a while after I moved back to New York just looking for a job, and I got this entry level position as an assistant to the person who was running publicity for Random House Publishing Group. And I am not a natural publicist. That is really it's. And I wasn't working as a publicist per se, but I am a natural editor. I think had I entered on that side of things, maybe I would have found my way there. But publicity was, not the right place for me. And even though I was entry level because I was sort of starting a whole new phase,
Mhm.
work phase, career phase, I was also just sort of a little old to be working as in that particular job. So it was just a sort of uncomfortable fit across the board. So it's a little hard to answer because for all sorts of reasons. But I would say, and I was only there for a year, but I would say that it's a pretty corporate environment. And when I gave my notice, what my boss said was, she could just feel that it was too corporate for me, for my personality. And I think she was right. I thought working in book publishing would be lots of fun because I love books. But, when you're there, so much of it actually is about selling books.
Yes.
And that's a really different angle, a
Hmm.
really different way of looking at books and thinking about books. And it just wasn't, I went from some sort of like idealized career as an artist, and by idealized, I mean sort of idealized, but also really hard, um, to sort of like this very corporate world. And, it didn't, there wasn't a good fit there, at least not at that time. So, when I then moved on to Juilliard, first to the drama division and then eventually to the vocal arts department, it just, I kind of, it was a breath of fresh air to be
Hmm.
surrounded by the performing arts again and to sort of feel this living, breathing thing that, we were creating around us, and that these students, these very talented students, were building, skills and a life around.
Hmm.
So, yeah, does that answer your question?
It does. I would only add two things. One is that you understand, I understand, but I want to say it anyway. Um, Publishing is about making money. It's about profits. And when I first arrived as a writer, my first book came out in 1986. I was very young. I was working at the Met as performance manager, but it was a food book. It was not a music book. And I was incredibly fortunate at Simon and Schuster to have a magnificent editor, and she's the one who Carol Lally, I'll say her name, is the one who taught me how to write a book. I knew how to write what I wanted to say, but that's different from writing a book. And I was very fortunate to have that. And she has exquisite taste and created a beautiful book to look at, to hold. It was a visual expression of what my words were after. It was a cookbook, but it was a lot more. It was a history book. It was an opera book. It was my way of writing an opera book when I was really writing a cookbook. Um, it was the pasta cookbook, and my title was Pasta Diva, which the publisher said no to, and it became the authentic pasta book. And I love Carol, but I didn't love the title because is it authentic pasta? Is it authentic book? What is authenticity when it comes to food? It just didn't quite ring. But it was not her doing, I don't think. I think it was the marketing department. And that was a lesson that I've had many times since in writing books, that I could have what I think is a great title and I can test drive the title among the public and they'll know what I'm talking about. But then a marketing department will override it and create a title that includes the current buzzword like healthy, happy, diva, things like that, that don't last as a book title.
Yeah.
And but anyway, I'm still happy to write books, and I hope to keep doing it because I really love doing it. But it's very solitary. And the other question I have for you is relates to the fact that you were in London for 5 years. You are a New Yorker.
Mhm.
London's a wonderful city. I was working there when the pandemic hit, and I came right home. But it's been a part of my life for many, many decades. But I know that when I lived in Italy for many years and came back after a long time in Italy, um, the adjustment was not easy.
Yeah.
And London and New York, you could say, yes, both kind of speak English, they have theater scenes and so on. They're very different cities and very different cultures. And the social interaction of London and New York are, in my view, entirely different. And I wonder whether coming back from London, whatever job you would have gone into, there would have been the adjustment, the social adjustment. I'm not saying one's better than the other, but just it's different here
Yeah.
than it is in London or Milan in my case, or wherever you would go. Um, and did that factor in as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with the implication. I do think that any job I would have had then, especially coming off of several months that felt quite grueling, where it was very hard to find a job. Um, I think I would have struggled, and I think I was struggling,
Mm,
to sort of find my feet in this city. And it wasn't having been a singer and a freelance singer and a freelance writer and editor for those years in my 20s in London. It's not like I came back here a wealthy woman with lots of
right.
money to spend on, living wherever I wanted and finding my way comfortably. So there was a long adjustment period, actually. I'm sort of glad you asked because I'm not sure I've really thought about it this way. I'm not sure that I felt settled back into New York until actually kind of recently, within the
I hear
last
you.
4 years. It's been a long time since I've moved back. I spent probably the first 5 years after coming back here, maybe longer, saying, I may be from New York, but I don't know that it's my natural habitat. And and that's not to say that I knew really that London was, or that anywhere else in particular was, though I was very happy in London. I don't know that I would have moved back here if not for some of the complexities around visas and all of those things. But it didn't feel like my natural habitat. And now I'm in a place in Brooklyn, a little corner of Brooklyn that I really love, and it's very quiet and residential, but still has the character of this city. But there's green space, and I feel pretty settled here. But I'm realizing, because you asked, that it's really only the last few years,
Mhm.
and it took a while. It really took a while.
Well, some listeners know that for family reasons, I have remained in New York for the entire pandemic. And my life before the pandemic was one of constant travel and working in theaters for 6 weeks and moving on to another theater. And that could be Salzburg or Milan or Chicago or wherever. And I loved that life of movement and travel. It was built in also with book writing and speaking and some journalism and radio work and so forth. And I adored it. And I have not left New York City since March of 2020 when I came back from London. And it's a strange experience for me because I've come to realize something that you said. I knew it before, but now I've had it shown to me every day that I'm from New York. I love this city. I love many, if not most, of its values, um, but I don't always want to be here. And I've been quoted often by other people. Say, I'll quote myself, quoting them, quoting me, that lucky, very lucky, is the man or woman who is born in the place where she is meant to be. Almost as lucky as that person if they come to discover the place where they were meant to be
Yeah.
and can spend time in that place. Less lucky is the person who never quite finds that place. And in my particular case, proud to be a New Yorker, love being a New Yorker, but so much of my life is animated by Italy, and especially one or two places in Italy that I'm going to keep to myself that completely speak to me and who I am. And the national conversation in Italy, even at its most banal, is more interesting to me than the national conversation in the United States, even at its most elevated, which we're currently not at, frankly. But the the desire to be in a place where you feel most yourself is exhilarating when it gets realized and frustrating when it doesn't. And my friendships in Italy are deeper for the most part than my friendships in America. That's the nature of friendship in Italy. So when I talk about the wonders of Italy, yes, the pasta, yes, the art, yes, the opera, yes, all of that, but it's really the Italian people and the way I relate to them. Other people think it's chaotic. They think it's garlicky, whatever they think it is. It's fine for them or not fine for them. But I really I connect when I'm here in America. I love my country, very proud to be a New Yorker. But when I go to the opera, as I recently went to Madame Butterfly and saw an extraordinary performance, as Mick Gregorian leading the cast, that I I'm connecting to the Italianness of Madame Butterfly, not to the Japanese story or the American cat who shows up there, but the Italian values, and it gets me every time. Because when I first saw Madame Butterfly, I was 22. I was living in 21. I was living in Bologna, and I didn't get it. I loved the music, but I didn't get the story. And this brings us back to Aria Code, that we can go through life, and now Madame Butterfly kills me, and I'm not a parent. I don't deal with the things that the characters in that opera have to deal with, but the humanity of that. In the case of the performance I saw recently, her relationship to her child.
Yeah.
I've seen Esme Gregorian do this before, many years ago in Stockholm when she was a new singer. And it was not a great production like the Met production. And she touched me deeply for her musical performance. But in this production at the Met, originally staged by Anthony Minghella, the child is a bunraku doll. And it's sometimes been criticized, and I've seen some singers barely manage to work with the doll. But when Gregorian did it, in addition to great singing and acting, you really felt that that was her baby. And the way she looked at it and the way she interacted with it, that baby, which I've seen for many years now, used to seem older, but he seemed 2 years and 8 months, something like that, when Gregorian dealt with him. And the way she acted with him as the mother of a very small child completely changed the way I experienced the whole story of Madame Butterfly. And to my knowledge, I don't have children, but um, I felt very much like a parent watching that performance.
Yeah.
That was a bit circuitous, but you know what I'm saying about discovering the place where we're meant to be
Yes, I do.
and finding rootedness in our place, whatever that place is.
I do understand. Yes. I
You don't have
hope.
to tell me where it is, but do you have such a place for you?
No, I
Huh?
was going to say, I hope that I become the person lucky enough to discover that place eventually.
Have you
But
been to Italy?
I have. I've been to several parts of Italy. I did love it. I wonder though, I I feel now it sounds like your place or places have been fairly consistent and enduring,
Mm-hmm.
which maybe is the nature of that place.
Yeah.
What is home? I realize this is not necessarily your concept of home, but what is that concept if it doesn't endure? But I I also wonder though, if I were to go on a quest now to find such a place, I wonder if it would be the same as whatever place I might have found when I was 20 or 25. I don't know. It's an interesting thought experiment, at least to me. But there's something full of promise, I'll say, I suppose, for me, about not yet having discovered the place.
Yeah.
Maybe this is a nice phase of my life to
Mhm.
to make such a discovery, if in fact I'm lucky enough to make such a discovery.
Yeah.
So, we'll see, Fred.
Well, I think that our essence, to the degree I know you, but I think our all human, our essence, um, we are who we are, and we grow and we evolve and we change, and sometimes fortune or misfortune has profound change on us. But nonetheless, there's my places, I will say one of them is a large city, not one of the largest, but a large city, and the other is a very little town. And there's something about the community life in that little town where I go and where I'm recognized and called L'Americano, the American, but and they may know my name. They have no clue what I do for work, even now with the internet. That's fine. I'm treated like another person in the town. And when I go shopping to the bakery and to the fish market, I get in line with everyone else. And I'm treated now as a citizen of the town, even though I'm not a citizen of the town. The city is a large cultural city with wonderful food. That's a lot of Italy. But there's something about the warmth of the people of that city that makes it distinct from other large cities in the world, including Italian cities. It's somehow like a big small town of 500,000, but has a small town feeling, and the interaction is so special. And humanity there and in the little town um, are prioritized. And I think maybe that's what I respond to, and maybe that's who I am, and that's okay. And whoever it is that you are, and you know yourself, maybe the town will or city will materialize in your travels. You don't have to look for it. I don't think it helps to look for it. I don't think it's something worth worrying about. The only thing I would say in that question is if there's an opera or an opera character, an opera setting, or opera music that you particularly identify with and say, that's me, and you don't have to tell me if you don't want. Mine would be Andrea Chenier and Tannhäuser and Fidelio and La Clemenza di Tito. So whatever that says about me, and Les Troyens to some degree, it's not about the music, though I love the music in all of them. It's about the questing of those characters and what they want and what they believe in.
Yeah.
And perhaps there is an opera or a series of operas where you closely identify with the stories of the characters. And then I'll say, well, if it takes place in Geneva, to pick a neutral place.
Quite a neutral place, yes,
Yeah,
the
because
most.
I don't know of any, there probably is an opera that takes place in Geneva, but it doesn't come to mind quickly.
Not
um, but do you, I think you'll know what I'm asking. Do you live opera? You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. I don't actually. I don't. Not certainly not in the way that you do. Um, I would say that in my recreational time, I spend more time seeing non-musical theater than I spend seeing opera or any other kind of any
Hmm.
musical form of theater. Not a big fan of major Broadway musicals, although, some of them crossed my path in formative moments and, got buried somewhere deep inside me. So I do love a few in that way. And I can appreciate some of the more contemporary shows, but I get really excited about theater, straight theater,
Hmm.
non-musical theater, in a way that, with opera for me, it at its best, it's transcendent. But I'm not as carried away with it on it when it's not at its best. If I
Hmm.
don't
Yes.
singing or the production even has a big impact on how
Hmm.
riveting I find any particular performance. Maybe that's something. I know that there are opera lovers who the music alone is enough sitting in a performance, assuming it's performed well, played well, and sung well, to really sort of carry them and take them somewhere. For me, it's without the total experience, it doesn't have the same impact on me to be
Hmm.
there. But I listen. It's not that I don't listen, but I'm talking about the experience of
Yeah.
being a live audience member. All of the pieces need to come together for me in order for me to really love it in a way that I think is not as true for people who live opera. Does that sound
It
fair?
does. I can tell you that the Met in December did Tannhäuser. I went 3 times and I could have gone 5 times.
Yeah.
It was just devastatingly wonderful to me. Juilliard recently did La Clemenza di Tito in a student cast where I would have, wonderfully directed by Stephen Wadsworth, but I would have wanted to take the students to the next level about their characters, but they're all in their 20s and have not lived what these characters live. And when I say that I live opera, I think part of it is that, as I mentioned about Madame Butterfly, over the course of a lifetime, um, some of these characters reside in me and their stories resonate in me. And I can say, when I watched Nelson Mandela um, and Winnie Mandela, and I had some work with South Africa, and they were saying, should we do Fidelio? And I said, well, Fidelio is great. You should do La Clemenza di Tito because it's about the moral strength to withstand the pressures on you to do what is the right thing, the judicious and legal thing, rather than the thing that personally gratifies you. And um, that we see in our world all the time. But I hear you. Most people don't live operas. That's really okay.
I
Um,
think I couldn't possibly knowing how you live opera, Fred. It's not. I couldn't possibly own that for myself because I think it's just a different level, you know.
that's
And
okay.
I know a few other people who exist at that level as well. And yeah,
But
I
I would
almost
specify to say I'm not a fan, if you
yeah
know what I mean.
yes I do
I'm
know.
really not a fan of, I mean, I am friendly with some singers. I'm collegial with many singers and conductors and so on. Those few singers who are my friends, I specify they're my friends because it should be known that way, not because I'm bragging, but just because if I relate to that particular singer, to one person I'll name, Ferruccio Furlanato, and I are old friends. I love him. I revere him, not as one of the greatest opera singers, but as a wonderful man who happens to embody many of the values that I was just talking about regarding Italy. Um, Whereas there are many, many other singers who I just admire and I think they're great and I respect their private lives and I believe I'm not a gossip. I'm trying to be a vault about people's privacy because people who are singers are in the public space and they're gossiped about and I hear terrible things said about singers that are wrong or misguided and so on. And I really do want to jump in and correct, and sometimes I do. But I want in which opera? In not Louisa May, in Ernani, in the libretto, there's a line, Ogni cor serba un mistero. Every heart harbors a mystery. And I believe in mystery. I believe in mystery in human interaction. I don't believe that we have to tell everything. I believe that using the senses to experience another person or an art form without putting it into words is a good thing. And that said, the alchemy of Aria Code works just right for me because it's a combination of the mystery and the personal. And your personal, I'm sure, behind it, but really the personal of the people who you present. And hello.
This is one of my favorite creatures.
Who is
It's
that?
funny. Her name is Cleo, short for
Cleo?
Cleopatra, because I think she has the bearing of an Egyptian queen.
Yes.
Uh, yes, but she is my one of my favorite living creatures. Anyway, she's going to crouch over here next to me. She might make another appearance, but we'll try
That would be
not
very pleasing to me.
to.
People are asked all the time, what's your favorite Shakespeare play or favorite opera? And my favorite Shakespeare play is one that I ask people to guess, and no one ever guesses it. It's Antony and Cleopatra by a long shot. And the Met opened in 1966 with Samuel Barber's Antony and Cleopatra. And I know that parenthetically, our Adagio listeners know that I always have my guests to list works, and you have a nocturne by Samuel Barber performed by the wonderful Gerald Finley and Julius Drake. So you can go to the show page and see Merrin's suggestions. But next season, coming to the Met, is John Adams' version of Anthony and Cleopatra with Gerald Finley and Julia Bullock.
Yep.
And that's the thing I'm most looking forward to next year. In a season full of things I'm looking forward to, I think it opens May 12th, if I remember, of 2025. And you don't have to give stuff away, but are you planning your next season and do some relate to what the Met is presenting, or do they also relate to operas that you're thinking about and studying right now yourself?
I haven't. So, in addition, the short answer is no. I have not started planning a next season. The longer, slightly longer answer is that in addition to RE Code, and in fact, my sort of main job at the Met, or at least when I started, was and is to produce the intermissions of the live in HD cinema
Hmm.
transcriptions of those productions. So, you know, if you go to see an opera in the opera house during the intermission, you might get up, use the bathroom, get a drink or some food. If you're watching from a movie theater in, let's say, Italy or anywhere else, even in America,
Brooklyn.
or Brooklyn, right at BAM, you what are you going to do for the 30, 35, sometimes 40-minute intermission, sometimes more than one intermission? So there's content that fills that time. And so I and a couple of other people are responsible for figuring out what we want to do with those intermissions, how we want to engage audiences, what we think is going to be the most enriching, interesting things, what are going to be the most interesting things for them to see, and in what order. And some of that will be live backstage interviews with the artists who are performing that afternoon. It's always a matinee, at least in this time zone. And or maybe other live segments. If it's a show with lots and lots of props, then we might have the prop master show some of those props and talk about the process of making them and sourcing them. So those are live elements, and then you get to see sort of the backstage magic with the set changes, which, speaking of magic, that really is like,
Yes.
there is something quite mysterious about how people manage to do extraordinary set changes in the time they do. And then there are pre-produced video elements, sort of short documentary style videos. So I might interview the director or the set designer or costume designer or some combination and put together a feature to enhance people's understanding of that specific production.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just coming up on the end of our HD season. In fact, this Saturday is the final HD. Well,
it will have been back
yeah,
in.
it will have been. Yes, May 11th will have been the final HD. So I'm, I've been in the midst ever since the season of Aria Code Wrapped. I've been focused on all of the HD presentations and those intermissions, which are coming to a close now. So that's where my focus has been. So no, there's been no planning yet about any future seasons, Aria Code or HD or otherwise. But that's what the summer is for.
Well, I go to a lot of the HDs and love them as a different kind of experience because, without exception, I will have seen them in the Opera House. So therefore, I'm comparing what I experienced in the Opera House to what I'm experiencing on the screen. To me, the sound of live opera is irreplaceable. The Metropolitan Opera House has wonderful acoustics. It's a great orchestra, magnificent chorus, and the impact of those bodies you get differently than you do inside even the best cinema. But on the other hand, you get to experience up close some of the performances that, if I'm seated in row T in the orchestra or row G up in the balcony or row F in the grand tier, which are my three different seats, you experience everything quite differently than it when you're watching it on screen. Two features that I really love recently, and not because these people are Italian, it really is not, but for Carmen, you had the conductor Daniele Ruscioni, and for La Rondine, you had the conductor Speranza Scapucci at the piano talking about the music. And both speak marvelous English, especially Speranza, but both of them really. And it was so enriching to understand how the composers created the music they did. And Bizet and Puccini are very different. And the story of Carmen and the story of La Rondine could not be more different.
True.
No one dies in La Rondine. But therefore, I love that you did that. I also love when the camera goes into rehearsal and finds Asmik Grigorian or Lisa Davidson in rehearsal for what they're doing, because it's a teaser. And you can say, well, there they are in their rehearsal clothing, which is pretty casual. And it requires you, the audience member, to bring if you have knowledge of La Forza del Destino in the case of Lisa Davidson, your knowledge of the opera to the scene that she's playing or rehearsing. But I think it must be more of a challenge when you're going live. You produce some of the features, and suddenly scenery is being changed, and a dolly with a piece of scenery goes rolling by while Susan Grammer, Julia Bullock, or someone, Matthew Polenzani, is interviewing a singer, and suddenly everything goes by. And sometimes singers are, having just performed, very emotionally still in their moment. And it cannot be easy, even, because many of the singers who do the interviewing are wonderful singers. They're not all of equal quality as interviewers. And they're reading text, and sometimes they have to respond to a piece of scenery suddenly rolling by, or get out of the way now because we're bringing this in. It's very exciting, but challenging. So would you, as one of the producers of these features, think of having backup pieces to stick in? How would you deal with an emergency? I don't mean a medical emergency, but a tech emergency, to replace one thing with another.
Well, mostly it's an interesting question because most of what we think about is making sure. So, for instance, we pretty much always end with a live interview, and the
Hmm.
intermissions with a live interview. And one of the reasons for that, there are a few, but one is that we have lots of extra questions prepared. So, in the event that the intermission is running long for some reason, maybe there's something going on in the house or something to do with the scenery change that took more time than it usually does,
Hmm.
we can stretch so that, the host isn't just standing there trying to figure out what to say. So we have lots of extra questions prepared. But that's a different sort of, you're sort of invoking the possibility of something even a little more challenging than that sort of scenario. And I would say we don't. There are no extra features that we've got to just
Hmm.
run. But I wonder, I'm relatively new doing this. When did I started working at the Met at the very, very end of 2021, December 27th, 2021. So there are people, the Met is a place that a lot of people work for decades, including
Mm.
some of the people that I work closely with on the HD transmissions. And I'm going to guess that in their bag of tricks, there are some ideas about what we would do if we really needed to cover some sort of
Hmm.
emergency, and it's probably happened before, but I haven't seen it. But would be a good question for me to ask. In any case, the best answer I can give you is we have extra questions in case things run
Yeah.
long.
Well, often the concluding interview, not always, is with the conductor.
Sometimes, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, not always, because sometimes you, like with Rustioni and Scapucci, you have a pre-recorded wonderful package. But other times the host goes down into the conductor's dressing room on A level and talks to the maestro as he or she is preparing for the last moment to go on. And then you suddenly hear the stage manager say, "Maestro to the pit. Maestro, all stop to the pit, please, right away. Please come to the pit." And they have to, in mid-sentence, they just say, "I gotta go." And I've always wondered at the transition from leaving them at A level, for people who know the geography of the Met, they're walking past a few lockers, they're going up a few steps, they're into the pit on the timpani side, and suddenly there they are in front of 3,786 seats and bowing, and they turn. For me as an audience member, those transitions are hard. Maybe not for the conductor, but because, again, the thing about the mystery,
Yeah,
that
it's what I'm trying to
I
say.
don't I don't want to see where the maestro. I know where she enters because I've been in the maestro dressing room endless times. But as a viewer, when I'm seated in the movie theater where I'm watching this, I just want to see the conductor appear and feel that I'm in the performance with her, with him, um, and then go back to the stage again. But that's not a complaint. It's just my personal, the way I experience opera. I know that countless people that I talk to in movie theaters, and I talk to everyone in movie theaters, not during the performance, but in the intermissions. Um, I say, now watch this broadcast. Do not go to the bathroom. Do not go for popcorn. Watch this feature. You'll learn more about about Turandot or whatever the opera is. Um, it's very compelling, and I, as the Met does all the time, encourage people always go to a live performance. Always, always, always. That's the way we support opera. It's the best way to hear opera, but nonetheless go to HDs if you cannot get to the opera house, and not just the Met, but any opera house wherever you live, because we want to support the art form. Because if in Memphis or in Bolzano, Italy, wherever we are supporting young singers and conductors and directors and designers on their way up, that's how they get to Vienna or to the Met. Very, very important. But what do you want to do next? I know what I want to see you do next, but what do you want to do next?
Oh, what's interesting? What does this say about me? I'm more curious to hear what you want to see me do next. Um, but I guess I I have so I feel kind of like an itch or a hunger to make a new sort of signature project, you know? I love the things that I work on and have been working on, but I also feel ready to grow personally,
Hmm.
professionally, and I also think that I feel ready to explore new ways to bring opera alive for people. And so that's very vague, but I think I will absolutely keep working on the HDs at the Met. But I think, I this summer I want to talk to some of my colleagues there and to Peter Gell, the general manager there, to start to dream up some new things and see what sticks. And I think I don't know, some sort of very early stage thoughts involve the possibility of trying to bring the music to life through animation,
Hmm.
and finding a way to do that that's engaging and beautiful and possibly can capture the imagination of like really younger audiences. But also, I think people are fascinated. This goes back to some of the HD experience, but fascinated by behind the scenes at the Met,
Yeah,
and the Met behind the scenes is extraordinary.
it is. Yeah,
The hundreds, thousands, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of people doing all different kinds of creative work, all of these artisans um, at the very highest level,
yeah,
and the amount of attention to detail that goes into everything, into the costumes, into the wigs, into the makeup, into the sets and the props. For examples, there are more examples, but there are so many people doing so much truly mind-blowing work in these spaces that are weird and interesting and
yeah.
noisy, busy, and so I think I would like to find a way to develop some sort of project series, something that takes people behind the scenes and brings that to life. And sort of, I think that it's always going to be my goal, dream, what have you, as with Aria Code, that whatever I make is uh, is compelling to people who already know and love the art form, or in fact the opera house, the specific opera house, and to people who have never been. And I think it's easy to say that, and I don't, but I mean it honestly. And I think
Yeah.
there's a way to come by that honestly. There's a way of approaching the way I making things, I
Yeah.
think, and talking about things and encouraging people I interview or hosts that I work with to talk about things that makes that possible, I think, I hope.
Hmm.
So, anyway, I think the sort of not quite answer to your question is I have a few ideas, but the main thing is I want to figure out my next project, the
Yeah.
next thing that I will fall completely in love with. And
Hmm.
that a few years from now, like I say now about Aria Code, this for the last few years has been, the love of my life, or a love
Hmm.
of my life. Cleo's listening, so she
I was
has to.
about to say, what about
Yes,
Cleo?
I know. Cleo is way up there too. Believe me, I love that cat. But yeah, that's I think without really knowing exactly what comes next, that's the
Hmm.
that's the impulse that I have. What would you like to see me do next?
Well, you kind of addressed it, but I want to specify: do not give up Aria Code and doing the features that you do because they're wonderful. But we live and grow. It doesn't mean we have to abandon what we've done if we love doing it. That
Yes.
it's really kind of wonderful to keep doing what you love doing if you get to do it and if you're paid for it. But Disney has nothing on the Metropolitan Opera in terms of magic and creation of illusion and having through craft, but also through music and through great music making, um, people come to believe and experience things that otherwise they never had contact with. And that's part of the magic of opera in general and of certain opera companies, amongst them the Met La Scala being another that really does that incredibly well. There are others, but for me, those are the big two, and not because they're famous, but just because of the artisanal aspect of everything that's done at La Scala and everything that's done at the Met. But I guess I always try to straddle the line between acknowledging the mystery and the magic, but not revealing every little detail of it. It's kind of like if you know how to do a card trick, you don't want to tell how to do the card trick or how to saw the lady in half. You don't want to show how you're doing that. You just
Yeah.
want to do it and have people be dazzled. Um, but I strongly believe, knowing you to the degree that I do, that your strength as an opera worker is your insights. And to be perfectly blunt, love many people, though I do work in opera, they're not all insightful. I love them for other reasons. They're their beautiful talent or their great personalities, and other things. They don't necessarily reveal, some do. Gerald Finley, rich in insights, magnificent as one example, and there are others. Thomas Hampson, another example of that. But not everyone has that, and not everyone needs to have that. If you can, I'm not going to name a singer because it'll make it sound like I'm saying she or he has no insight. But if you, but if you have someone just a I have one in my head, but I'm not going to say her name. She's a magnificent soprano. She's really, I love her. I go to all of her performances. She sings a lot of bel canto, so you Wagnerites, don't worry. She's a bel canto soprano. And I adore her, but I wouldn't, and her acting is extraordinary, but I wouldn't necessarily sit down and talk to her. I want her to be on this program. But if ever she comes, I don't think I'd try to address her insights. Whereas with you, I immediately went there at the beginning of our conversation because I knew it's rich territory. And but I don't love that singer any less because I don't consider her insightful. It may be that she's very insightful, but doesn't talk about it. So I want to give her the benefit of the doubt that maybe she keeps her insights to herself, and what she puts on the stage is what she brings in, including incredible talent, amazing acting, great technical abilities as a singer, but also as an actor, um, great understanding of how to wear a costume, all of these things that opera singers need to be trained in. I'll only parenthetically say she was trained in Italy. She's not Italian, but she was trained in Italy and acquired that approach to your costume, to your stage deportment, to the language, all of which she does incredibly, incredibly well. Um, but you have among your gifts the ability to have us understand things. And the fact that Aria Code does it so subtly, but at the end of the 40 minutes or whatever it is, I'm an opera guy and I come away and I think, wow, I get it now. I get it about Una Furtiva Lagrima, an aria I've heard a million times you had me talk about. But when I heard the finished program, it was something very different from just my part of it. It was something huge for an aria that we think of as a beautiful, slightly wistful aria sung by a bashful tenor, if there is such a thing as a bashful tenor. There is
Searching.
actually. But and that's a gift. That's really a talent. And I didn't know until I began preparing that you had studied psychology.
Mhm.
And I don't imagine you actively apply, this or that condition or syndrome or behavior to a particular role in opera. But nonetheless, you have the innate understanding. You studied and performed in ballroom dancing, which I didn't know. And so you're agile. And you
I'm
can move backwards.
well, I once was, and I once could. Although, first of all, thank you. That is, I take that as a truly great compliment.
It
So,
is meant to be.
um, and also, ballroom dancing, though now long ago and far away, that is maybe the most fun I've ever had doing. I loved ballroom dancing. I still sort of fantasize about finding a way to revive that part of my life because it's just so invigorating. But yes, I who knows? I think the ways in which psychology weave themselves in to the work I do, you're right. It's not, I'm not going through and thinking, here's this, I relate this person to this diagnosis, but I think what it is, and if you spoke to any of my closest friends, you'd learn that a lot of the conversation is not, we're not having small talk. I'm interested in going in pretty deep
Yeah.
with people and sharing deeply as well. And so I think that we're just talking about my deepest inclinations ultimately, which is to really try to understand, to try to
Hmm.
understand. And that is about the people that I interview, that's about the music, that's about the story, that's about the psychology, sometimes of the composer, sometimes nothing to do with the composer. But I think that my desire to understand as deeply as I can, hopefully, is what translates to actually
It does.
helping people to understand themselves.
But it does bring to mind one of my very favorite episodes of Aria Code that you did. I'm not on it, but I listened to it more than any other. Can you guess or no?
No, as you know, I can barely remember the episodes myself. So wow.
Electra. You had Will Berger
Yes,
on.
yeah, that was
And wow,
yep.
because he captured the spirit of what you were talking about. And but in addition, I didn't know about your study of psychology, but now that I do, you just want to say to Electra, girl, talk to your brother, talk to
Yeah,
your
yes.
sister.
Need to learn some healthy communication tactics. Sure.
Get a
Yeah.
plan.
Get a therapist, even. Somebody help this woman.
It's I commend to people. How do people find Aria Code online?
Yeah, so you can listen online at ariacode.org,
Yeah.
and then any podcast app. If you do a search for Aria Code, it will appear there as well.
Listeners, don't make Electra the first one.
Nope, that is really diving into the deep end in a
It
major.
really is.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh,
not because I was on it, but I think one that you did, Una voce poco fa.
mhm.
Oh no, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, Naquela Fanno from Cenerentola.
Yes, I love
Yes.
that episode.
Yeah, I do too. I think that's a good starter one
I
because
agree.
Rossini never wrote a wrong note, and it's happy, it's sad, it's everything. It captures emotions in opera, but no one dies.
Yeah, and
Save that for Electra later on.
Joyce DiDonato is so wonderful in that. You were
Yeah,
wonderful in that. And
thank
it's
you.
you're right. The music has everything in it. I loved most working on episodes with a sort of lengthier, like a scene or a really
Hmm.
multifaceted piece of music with different sections, because then you get to go on a real dramatic psychological journey as well as
Yeah.
the journey. And those were always, they have been the richest ones to work on, and
Hmm.
that was definitely a good example of that. I agree. A very good first episode.
So, Merrin Lazyan, did I leave anything out?
Nothing in the world. We covered it all.
No, we're done.
I know, I mean, I think we could probably talk about many things for a lot longer, but I also feel, I don't know, I really enjoyed this conversation.
I
I feel
did as well. I genuinely thank you. And as I said, we know we're friendly. We're not close friends and that we don't see each other very often, but I respect your work a whole lot. I think you respect mine. And I love what you do. I love what you do for opera. The more that I listen to Aria Code, the more I learn. It's kind of like going to those places that I described before that may be where you're meant to be. And sometimes you'll cover an opera that's not my favorite opera at all, but I will still listen and learn more about the opera and about the people and the way other people experience it. And I very intentionally did not talk about, let's call it the fourth character in your podcast. That you have the composer, the singer, the musicological person, but then you often have one or two other characters who are not the expected ones, the way you were talking about with Reg's Progress, with one of Johnny Cash's daughters. That those are the people who really put everything into perspective.
yeah.
And I'm not going to talk about who you had for Una Furtiva Lagrima when I was on, but she was fascinating and unexpected, and not the person I would ever have thought to ask to join in for that discussion, but she was terrific. And this is what makes Ariko different from any other opera appreciation thing that I've ever come across. So I'm a devoted listener, occasionally participant, and
Wonderful to
it's the thing I commend to people more than anything else apart from my own book.
I think that's fair. I think we can let you get away with that
My book first, but then Aria Code.
in the right order for you, Fred. For thank
And
you.
then, of course, and I mean this very seriously, going to a live performance. Going to a live performance. It is so thrilling, and it never gets old for me. And I think that if you take someone along and help them not feel awkward and, I'm not dressed right or I don't understand everything. And I always say, well, it's not about understanding, it's about feeling. And it's not a test. And we're not going to come out of here and say, so who is the best singer or did you like the choreography? It doesn't matter. What did you feel? And when you ask people to express what they feel in a world that is so analytical, where everything is analyzed to a fare thee well, no one talks about their feelings, or they don't feel free to talk about their feelings.
They feel
And
detached from them even.
opera's the big shrink. I never called it that before.
That's the new book title. Opera's the Big Shrink. I would read that book.
Merrin, thank you so much. And listeners, ariacode.org.
Thank you so much.